funny you asked this because I was just reading today about how Milton Keynes, a famous economist back in the day, predicted that by 2030, US GDP would grow 6 to 8 times what it is, which would allow for everyday people to work 15 hours a week.
Ouch.
You know, you just have to love AOC. She's so cute. You know, the funny thing is that the majority of people that vote for her do not realize that there is no such person as Milton Keynes. Right?
Have you seen the BBC clip?
No, I haven't.
I'll have to send that to you.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Milton Friedman and John Maynard Keynes were two economists of exactly opposite opinions about economics.
Not to be confused with Maynard Krebs.
Exactly. Yeah. Two things is that first, John Maynard Keynes, the economist back from the 20s, did talk about that, you know, hypothetically in the future that we would be so productive and we would be able to produce and work at such a high productive rate that we would be able to work fewer hours and be able to support our families, right? Sounds great. What John Maynard Keynes did not expect was that we would be running a $1 trillion deficit and $24 trillion in debt. About to push that up the ladder here because of this new budget that's coming out. When John Maynard Keynes was alive, we were running between 6 and 8% economic growth versus 2% economic growth today. We are currently running over the last decade, really since the turn of the century to be exact, we are running the lowest rate of economic growth ever in the history of the United States on an average basis. I produce this chart every now and then. But the important point about this is that there's a direct correlation between the surge in the actual debt, the deficit, and weaker rates of economic growth. And so while, you know, AOC is, you know, cute as a button, Milton Keynes was not the famous economist back in the day that predicted, you know, by 2030 that we'd all be working 15 hours a week. But this is the promotion, right? This is the idea of the left to take more of your money. Americans need to kind of wake up to the reality that government does not work in your best interest anymore, right? Government's supposed to, right? We elect representatives, they go to Washington, and they're supposed to be passing policy to promote the national security, safety, and welfare of the United States. That's it. That's all they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to be involved in education and energy and defense and making sure that the public safety works, right? So infrastructure, roads, bridges, electric power grids, those type of things. That's the government's responsibility. You know, more or no less, everything else is a byline, belongs to the states. That should be the way it is. We now have continued to move in a direction where we want the government to pay more of everything, right? We want the government to take care of welfare. We want the government to take care of education. In 1980, when the Department of Education really kind of took over the entire educational system, at that point in history, the United States ranked 1, 2, and 3 in math, science, and language. Today, we rank in the 27th, 28th, 26th spots relative to other countries. The country of Estonia ranks better than the U.S. in terms of education, just to put it out there. Government is not the answer to creating better economic prosperity, but this is what AOC and others are promoting, and they're even pushing this further, and we've talked about this before in terms of this idea of modern monetary theory. It already exists. We're doing it now, which is where the government just spends money without regard for where it comes from, right? We pass these outlandish budgets. We pass out these, you know, outlandish ideas of spending. We fund everything that everybody wants to fund to try to get a bill passed, but there is no budget. We just spend, and we don't worry about the debt. Why? Because interest rates are low, so we can just finance this, and we'll worry about paying it later. And it all works well for a while until people finally wake up and realize what they've given up to have that. And it's coming, and that takes time. You can already look at the millennial generation that's coming up. They're already suffering the effects of this. And this is going to continue as we go down the road. It's going to get worse. There is a cost to economic prosperity for doing what we're doing. This was not John Maynard Keynes' ideas. John Maynard Keynes suggested that we should always run a surplus unless you're in a recession, at which point the government should use debt for productive investments to help stave off some of the recessionary drag, allow the economy to recover, provide the support through productive investments to as the economy goes through recession. But once you get through the recession, the government should return itself to a surplus to prepare for the next time. In 1980, we kind of decided to use some deficit spending to help come out of a dual back-to-back recessions. We had interest rates and inflation running at double-digit rates. Reagan started using deficit spending to help break the back of that problem and get the economy growing again. And that was the right thing to do at the time. And he was very successful doing that. Unfortunately, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump decided that a little deficit spending was good, so a lot must be better. And we've just continued to do this now for the last 40 years and just create this deficit spending. And don't give me this line that Clinton balanced the budget. He didn't. He took $2 trillion from Social Security, which is now we have a Social Security problem. The issue is that we've never curtailed the spending, right? We've never controlled the budget and to create organic economic growth. And instead, we've used debt to supplant this growth. So I was talking about just a second ago. So, when we're talking about this idea of a Minsky moment, we've now pushed ourselves to the point to where when the next Minsky moment happens, it's going to be substantially larger than we've seen in the past because of the amount of leverage and excess that we put into the system. As an example, the last time we had a Minsky moment was in 2007. We had about $600 billion worth of subprime mortgage debt that blew up. We've got about $1.6 trillion of leveraged loans. We have a tremendous amount of BBB debt right on the verge of going into junk debt. We've got a huge amount of liability shifted into pension funds that's in debt, that in the event of a downgrade across debt is going to require liquidation of assets out of pension funds, so forth and so on. There's just so much debt that is now levered back into the system. Corporate debt is at all-time records. A lot of that debt is negligible, to say the least. Tremendous amount of companies that are currently in the financial system basically depend on debt, and they depend on cheap debt for survival. If interest rates ever go up or financing gets shut off because of a weaker economic environment, et cetera, there's potential for a very sharp spike in bankruptcies of these companies that are basically living and dependent upon debt for survival. But that's the Minsky moment. That's where you wind up in this point. And so this brings us up to our article today that we have on the website talking about corrections. Sean Langlois wrote an interesting article last week talking about the potential of a 60% correction. Everybody immediately goes, that'll never happen, right? So we've had two 50% corrections already this decade. I mean, since the turn of the century. I keep saying this decade, last 2 decades, right? We've had two 50% corrections. And people have completely dismissed now that we've had this bull market, that we can never have a correction of that magnitude again. And the attitude is that, if you have a 40% correction, that won't even take you back to where you were in 2007. Well, maybe the case. But you're not 35 or 45 years of age anymore. People that, baby boomers that were on that were 45 in 2000 had plenty of time to get back to even. And 55 during the financial crisis, they had time to get back to even. They're now 65, right? We have baby boomers retiring at 10,000 people a day, so forth and so on. You know the numbers. A 30, 40, 50% correction will inevitably ensure that those individuals who are already underfunded, if we take a look at any of the metrics from 401k plans to IRAs to investment accounts, et cetera, 80% of Americans don't have a whole lot of money saved up. And a 50% correction at this point will pretty much ensure they will never retire and will be totally dependent upon Social Security for almost the majority of their income in retirement. So the purpose of the article, though, is we go through and we talk about the importance of corrections in markets and actually map out what a 10%, 20%, 30, 40, 50, 60% correction, how far it would set you back over the course of the last few years. And the important point about this is just to put some visual aid to this idea that corrections don't really matter. They matter, and they matter a lot. And as far as Milton Keynes goes, don't know who that guy is, but The real point is that as an individual, as a person with money in the markets, as a person depending on your retirement, the thing you want more of is economic prosperity. And in order to have more economic prosperity, you need less debt. And that's just a function of math. Be right back after the break.
Got questions for Lance later? Ask now at realinvestmentadvice.com.